Colonel Jim Williams, thank you very much for joining us today.
It's good to be with you today. I'm a 25-year veteran of the military. I retired as a full colonel in 1984 and went into a new field called human resources. In 1991, my wife suggested that I go visit our family doctor because the family was visiting, but I hadn't gone. Was quite an active private pilot at that time and got physicals from a flight surgeon every 3 years and didn't really see the necessary to go into family doctor also. But wives are persistent, and so I went. And that's where my prostate cancer journey began.
Can you give us an idea of what your diagnosis experience was like?
Yes, I say my wife saved my life. This was this young internist in Chicago that my friend had been going to. And he included in the blood work before my visit something called PSA, which was a new blood test at that time. There was no discussion with me about the merits of the high false positives or false negatives. As you know, it's not a special test. It just included in the blood work. Well, the results of that PSA test was the number 10. And back in those days, 4 was a magical number. Since my number was 10, I was African American. I was 55 years old at the time. I was referred to a specialist, a urologist. And there, the urologist could actually take cells from my prostate and see whether it was a healthy cells. There's a Gleason score index that can be used to classify it as to the degree of cancerous or unhealthy cells there were. And in my case, my Gleason score was 7, which put me in the immediate range. So that's based on that biopsy from the urologist. That's how my cancer was discovered. And as you know, the best time to conquer this disease is in the early stages. And the early stages is before there's any symptoms. Well, hadn't been that PSA test observation, then I would not have known that I might have prostate cancer. And that's why the screening tool is so important. Not that it discovers cancer, but it discovers that something is going on in the prostate and gives the health provider a baseline number to use as he or she continues examining and looking at what's going on with Jim Williams.
So how long did it take for you to go through your diagnosis process?
Very quickly. This was 1991. As I remember, the physical examination was done in May. In June, I had the results of the diagnosis from the urologist. And one of the recommendations from the urologist was that I travel to Mayo Clinic and have them get a second opinion on my prostate cancer diagnosis. And I questioned this because I was living and working in Chicago at the time, and Chicago is a big city, has great facilities and medical facilities and specialists. And Rochester, Minnesota is 5 hours away where Mayo Clinic is located. And why did he see a necessity for me to go to a Mayo Clinic? But that was a blessing in disguise. And my urologist didn't say, because he was a surgeon trained, he didn't say his way was the only way. He exposed me to a radiologist who looked at the world differently than he did. And he referred me also to an oncologist because they do all kinds of cancer treatment, in addition to recommending that I go to Mayo Clinic. And not only that, he made the arrangements for my visit to Mayo Clinic. And that all took place in July and August of 1991. And I ended up at Mayo Clinic in September of 91 for a second opinion. So I more or less had a perfect storm. I had a young internist who was up on his game. I had a urologist who was flexible and recommending, suggesting that I look totally at the what was available, and this is before the internet. Uh, I went to a world class facility and treated by a surgeon who was quite aggressive and suggested treatment beyond the surgery, and a healthcare plan that paid for all that. And I thought that was the norm when people in my situation got on the cancer journey, and found out that my situation wasn't the norm, but was the exception. Now that was 1991, and we're a few years ahead of that now in 2024, but it really hasn't changed that much.
Were there some words and terms that were confusing to you when you spoke with your doctors or your medical team?
Well, it was a whole new area for me. So when you talk about Gleason scores, and when you talk about PSAs, and when you talk about the radical prostatectomies, and lymph nodes and um prostate beds, these was all new terms. And at the time, I couldn't go on the internet and bring up a browser, and with the use of AI, type in a word and get tons of information. My only source of information were the people I was referred to and the library. And you have to be an informed consumer, just as if you get a dent in your car and the insurance company requires you get three estimates on its repair. You as a consumer have a major role in participating in this journey. I tell people that no matter what magic medicine we have, or diagnosis, the treatment, if you as a participant don't do your work, that these great drugs and things we have won't work well. So that means you have to be informed consumer. That means you have to have good health behavior and uh, exercise and diet, and be aware of the environment that you live. And you have to ask the questions and write them down, and don't be scared to ask your doctor what they mean. And take a second person when you go uh, to these type of gatherings, so they can grasp some of the information you might not be able to grasp. And we do that in many of our life experiences. But for some reason, we don't do that in medicine, and that's unfortunate. The notes and documentation that's taken on visits are recorded, and it's there for the patient's review. And so, even if you didn't take any notes during the session, you can see what was recorded by the physician in his notes, and use that as you study what's going on.
So, how did you feel after you were diagnosed, Jim?
Well, it's not what I expected to hear when I got the diagnosis of cancer, but I said, I put my trust in the people that I was dealing with. They seem to be quite knowledgeable. Seem to be quite supportive. Uh, and so I just took it step by step.
So, how did you explain your diagnosis to others, your family and friends? And
That's a good question, because one of the problems we have with our work is it's hard to get men who've been diagnosed or treated to come out of the closet and tell their stories. Their stories are very powerful, and many times they resonate a lot more with the audience than the health professionals who we usually bring you, who are giving evidence-based information of what that survivor has to say. Has a lot more uh, resonance with the audience, and they accept that many times more than the professional. I didn't have any problem exposing and talking to the world about my situation. I was treated in September of 1991, and that December, I in my Christmas or annual Christmas letter to my friends and neighbors and family, told them about my experience, and the importance of. I had just gotten hooked up with Us2 International, and was working with them on advocacy, and said in my letter the importance of men uh, getting screened for prostate cancer.
I understand how sensitive and that can be.
What's all that about? Well, that's the DRI, digital rectal exam. And men will rather die and do because they say, I'm not going to stick a finger up my ass, you know? But what's going on with that examination? The physician can feel the prostate through the rectum wall. It's a very uncomfortable 10-second examination. But by feeling the part of the prostate through the rectum wall, the physician can learn whether it's enlarged, whether it's healthy. And these are important early steps in determining whether or not they need to move on with a diagnosis. But men, will try to avoid the DRI because of that finger exercise. And then they say, well, my doctor's a female. Surely I don't want her to do that. And I said, you're lucky because women have smaller fingers than men.
Good point.
But can you imagine in 2024 that we have those conversations about examinations that prevent men from staying alive? When men die of this disease and metastasize, like a lot of cancers, it goes into the bone structure and then slowly goes through the whole body. And bone pain is the worst pain you can imagine. And there you're sitting by the side of a man who was slowly dying of this disease and gone haywire. We were talking about PSA numbers, and mine was 10. Now, when you talk about people with aggressive and metastasized disease, you talk about PSAs of 1,200 and 1,300.
Wow.
So it's going crazy to the body, and you're watching them die. And 5 years before, they told you, well, no, I'm not going to get an examination of 10 seconds. And I told them, ask your wife the annual physical examination they go through is more than a 10-second exercise. And I'm asking you for 10 seconds that possibly will save your life. And it's not an easy sell. In my case, they encouraged me to get those second and third opinions. So second opinion is very important in this non-pure science of medicine.
You had a medical team. You've told us the different doctors that you went to. Did they work together? And if so, how did that work?
No, that's a good question because in 1991, I was referred to various people, but there wasn't much interaction between those people. I took that information and then pieced what I got from one to the other.
I know PSA is a screening test. What about PSMA?
PSA, it's a good point because now they probably do PSA and PSMA, which is a more definitive diagnosis, MRIs, and they do that before they do biopsies. Well, now they do MRIs, PSA, MA, and other screening tests before the biopsy because they have found that by using these tools that the cancer is at such a low stage that there's no more action that needs to be taken at this time. And the recommendation is active surveillance, which means we actively watch, rescreen periodically to see whether it has advanced. And because of this new diagnosis approach, it avoids a lot of overdiagnosis and unnecessary treatments that occurred back in 1991.